director of the UNDP Cerebral Project and UNDP Energy Advisor since 2009. He is a holder of a PhD from the University of Bath in Renewable Energy Policy and Economics, and a Master of Science from Imperial College in Environmental Technology. The focus on environmental economics, with a double degree, a double undergraduate degree, that's equally double major, right? From the American University of Beirut and London School of Economics in Political Science and Environmental Policy with Economics, respectively. He has several peer-reviewed publications and several years of experience in environment-related consultancy. He's also a lecturer and part-time faculty at the American University of Beirut in Energy Economics and Policy and Environmental Economics. We'd like to listen also to...
Thank you. Thank you very much, Professor, for inviting me to be part of this important seminar. I will try to be as quick and as brief as possible, so we can leave room for discussions. I'll be talking about with a focus on sustainability for wind and solar only. Basically, again, as we all know, when we say sustainability, we cannot just say environment. We have to look at the economic, the environmental, and the social. Focusing in on the potential of Lebanon, and this is of wind and solar. This is the potential for wind based on the publication of the Wind Atlas back in 2010, I think. Now, this takes into account the inclination of the ground. It takes into account natural reserves where we cannot build wind farms, heritage sites, historical sites, urban areas, etc. When we seclude all these things and when we take the minimum of a 6.5 meter per second average wind, we found out in 2010, and it was a shock, that Lebanon, for such a small country, that we have a lot of wind resources. The only downside to the study really is that it doesn't take into account the grid and how the grid in these certain areas, as you can see in the map, especially in Akkar, will be able to take increasing quantities of wind electricity. But in Lebanon, we have 5.4 gigawatts of wind potential from a theoretical perspective. I'm sure it's much less when you take into account the grid and other power plants and demand. For solar, it's even much, much more. I mean, we have a very sunny country, and believe it or not, we do have a lot of land, and I'm not talking about agricultural land. I mean, for those who take a drive up to the Hermel area, and a lot of times during this past insecurity on the borders that we've seen, we have massive amounts of land, barren lands, that we can do solar plants. There will be some issues about the grid. Is there grid availability or not? So this is an important issue. But I guess what's missing is to really see the biodiversity implications, which is very important, Professor Christina, that we did not look into the biodiversity implications. So if there's a barren land, desert land in the Hermel area, I say it's not worth anything in terms of biodiversity. I don't know. I really don't know the answer to this question. Maybe there are some special kinds of insects or stuff that we should preserve. I really do not know. Anyhow, so from a technical perspective, we have it in Lebanon. We have potential for wind and solar. From the economic, Professor Jadid, you shed the light on this, very much so. The prices are incredible. We never expected this to happen, that the prices, since I came back and began at UNDP in 2009 until today, the whole picture of energy has transformed. And renewables is now one of the cheapest ways to generate electricity. And this is also currently happening with storage, and this is something interesting to see as well. I would like to shed on the economic part when I talk about storage. This is, which has also been mentioned, I think, by Professor Rabia, that if you see this bids that happened in Colorado in the United States, you can see that for utility scale solar PV storage, 3.6 cents per kilowatt hour, utility scale storage. So you're talking about solar PV that you can do in the daytime that will give you power 24 hours. I'm not talking about interseasonal storage, like you store in summer to give power in winter. I'm talking about daily storage um, capacities. Wind and solar and storage, 3 cents, 4 cents. This is crazy. This is transformational. This has to let us say, hey, hold on a bit. Do we still go the way we're going? Do we still go with the power plants that we're thinking about? There is something here. And by the way, this is trickling to Lebanon as well. I heard recently that someone has reached the Prime Minister's ear to tell him that we can use utility scale storage instead of, for Beirut, for example, to cover the 3 hours of blackouts, instead of building power plant for the Beirut region. So this is slowly trickling to the policymakers' ears. But one thing is important, that these prices that you see on the slide, and it's not Lebanese specific, because half of the costs involved in renewables is down to the cost of finance. How much does it take to raise equity and loans? And in Lebanon, it's very risky. Dr. Shdeed knows we don't have a regulatory authority. So regulatory authority risks. Our grid operator, I mean, we all know how the grid is being operated, how much the blackouts are, the losses. So I would worry about these things, the political risks, etc. This is from a study called De-risking Renewable Energy Investments, published this year or last year from the UNDP. And you can see the difference. To raise equity from the best-in-class country, like a country like Germany, for example, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, investors require a return of 7% for wind and solar projects. In Lebanon, 16% return. So they want to reflect this higher risk in their return. The banks in Germany will loan you for such projects at 3% interest. Here in Lebanon, it's 9% interest. And for anyone who's done a mistake like myself to buy a home and take a loan for 20 years, you know what it means, a slight difference in interest rate when you are financing these. It reflects on the power purchasing price. It becomes more expensive. So, but they are still economically feasible. From a social perspective, also a lot of literature out there on jobs, renewable energy and jobs, and comparing it to conventional power, more jobs in renewables than conventional power. And now all the donors, especially after the Syrian crisis, they're very worried about job creation, and they want job creation for Lebanese for different reasons, but it's good for us. I mean, jobs is important, and renewables is a way to foster jobs, especially in rural areas, as Dr. Shdeed also mentioned. Socially also, renewables are important for other reasons as well. They can have impact, this is from a distributed perspective, on property value. They can have impact on local empowerment. So yes, no more monopolies. It could be handed down to people who can generate and raise revenue now. It can have psychological impact. Someone feels better that their water is coming from solar hot water, or their electricity from solar PV. And it can have a double dividend effect. So when you have a solar PV, you will turn on your washing machine when the sun is shining, as an example, and lower your overall demand for electricity from the grid. And now the focus of this presentation is on the environment. So our wind farms are located at the second, where we have wind potential mostly, this purple area here. It's the second most important flyway for migratory birds in the world. And so here, is it a zero-sum game? Do we go for wind farms and not care about migratory birds, or vice versa? So this is a concern that we had to take into account. And we all know that for the environment, I won't go in detail, for wind, there are several concerns. Migratory birds and bats and what have you, noise, as Professor Christina mentioned, landscape impact. This is very important. Yes, these sites in Akkar, the 200 megawatts, are on a ridge that start next to the Syrian border, south to Akroum, all the way down. This is a beautiful ridge. And if you put these structures up, what will it do to the landscape? Who will judge? Who will say this is yes, this is a no? These are important questions to answer. Flicker, especially if you have homes close by, and the flickering effect of wind. And you have also problems during the construction phase of a wind farm. Same thing with solar photovoltaic as well. You have land use. This is very important, what's been mentioned. Wind in these lands, they will not take away all your land. You can still do farming and what have you. You can still graze beneath the wind farms, although there have been some local concerns that the wind turbines will make the cattle fly off. This is one of the wind farm developer was telling me that people there, this is a solid concern. They don't know this technology. So with PV, it's different. You need to take the land. Now, to raise it to 4-meter height of PV, you're talking about a structure here. So you need maybe more land, more cost. So at what cost? What's the balance? So we have to look at the biodiversity effects. But I read somewhere that in some PV plants, actually, bees are becoming much better. They're growing around PV farms because the humans don't enter, and so they can freely roam. So we have to look at the positives and the negatives of renewable energy systems. And at the end, also from a social perspective, environmental perspective, it's important that the people there and that they take what they deserve. What they deserve, how much revenue should people take from this area? Are they being treated fairly? Are they given the right information? Are they being engaged well by the wind farm, the private sector who are building the wind farms up there? These are important questions that should be raised. The UNDP and the Ministry of Environment published this strategic environmental assessment for Lebanon's renewable energy sector in 2014. This document is available online. It's published by the Ministry of Environment. Now, it wasn't publicly adopted by the Council of Ministers, but it does set the foundation for environmental impact assessment, what the environmental impact assessment for these projects have to have. I won't go through them, but they contain most of the things I just mentioned above: noise, flicker, land use, etc. And this is what's important. The Ministry of Environment, I think, is very aware of the environmental implications of wind and solar. And they're very aware of the issue of the migratory birds and other issues. And they're taking the environmental impact assessment very seriously. Any wind farm and PV developer, and now there are bids going on in the Ministry of Energy and Water, they will not get approved to go ahead without getting their EIA approved, environmental impact assessment study approved. And so this is something very important. And this is something, by the way, because most of these investors are going to go to international finance institutions like the IFC, the EBRD, the EIB, etc., to try to get loans that are at a lower interest rate to lower their cost of financing. And no way will the IFIs agree to loan them without looking at their environmental impact assessment. And if they see it as a copy-paste environmental impact assessment done for $3,000, they're not going to get the money. It has to be a Class A environmental impact assessment that really takes into account of so many of the issues and what's the mitigation done and what's the engagement with the communities and so on. Thank you.